Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Hanson for the Foundations of Wellbeing program, and I'm really happy to be here with my friend and truly my teacher, Pouria Montazeri. And I'll probably mangle the pronunciation slightly of his name, but definitely not mangle my sense of him in my heart. We're going to be focusing here on Rumi and to some extent probably focusing as well on certain aspects of Islam, the context in which Rumi lived, taught, and wrote for its usefulness in terms of the secular purpose of the Foundations of Wellbeing program, which is developing inner resources that we can draw upon in everyday life for resilient well-being. A bit about Pouria. I think I'll just sort of more or less read his bio so I can get it kind of right. Pouria grew up with Rumi's poetry and teachings. He draws from his 28 years of experience with Sufism, Advaita Vedanta, and other mystical and contemplative traditions and practices, and his experiences as a teacher, a spiritual director, a coach, a speaker, a poet, a mindfulness instructor, a guide to gatherings of meditators and others with spiritual interests, a mentor, and a filmmaker to support himself and others to live more creative, peaceful, and meaningful lives. He wrote, directed, and shot Shams and Rumi, The Fragrance of Axis Mundi, which won many international film awards. I've worked with Pouria in many settings, and I can tell you that he's the real deal. He practices what he preaches, and he's been extremely supportive of me personally. Pouria's primary professional activity these days is leading in the footsteps of Rumi, an integrated collection of programs and resources that you can learn more about at his website, footprintsofrumi.com. Okay, that's the introductory part. So, Pouria, how are you, and how is it for you to be here?
Well, thank you so much, Rick, for having me. And you know how much love I have in my heart for you and how much I honor you. So I so appreciate this opportunity to be with you and those that will be watching this. And I just want to also start with the gratitude for all the amazing women and men, known and unknown, seen or unseen, that have come before us, that have paved the road from which I could understand that there is more to just what my eyes see and has guided me thus far. So I want to invite them into this space with us with deep appreciation and gratitude to every single one of them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying all that. To keep going, I won't say to begin because we've already begun. To keep going, I want to ask you a question I ask everybody just about for this program, which is, since the Foundations program is about growing inner resources of various kinds for various purposes, including perhaps spiritual ones, why has it been important for you, stepping back, looking at your life, why has it been important for you personally to grow resources of different kinds inside yourself?
That's really beautiful. The honest answer to that is in the Islamic and the Islamic Sufi context that I grew up with, kind of acknowledging the natural disposition of a human being and kind of that the path and the journey is to achieve complete health, like pure total health, which is balance and harmony in one's being with one's essence. So through those teachings, I learned the importance of it to a point that I can't even distinguish between the two, because that path has led me towards balance and harmony and health on all different levels holistically. So that is why it's become important for me. And the more that I delved into this through the teachings and the guidance, the more I realized how much these resources are important for myself and my place in this life, in this world, amongst others. So for me, it's really a natural gravitation towards wholeness that is embedded in me that I wasn't aware of until I learned that through this path.
Okay, thank you. That was one of the more eloquent answers I've ever received to that question. So thank you very much. We're going to be focusing on and exploring the life and poetry and teachings of Rumi who's obviously a wonderful voice of wisdom and heart, speaking to us intimately today from nearly 800 years ago. Could you tell us, Pouria, a bit about how you became interested in Rumi and how your engagement with him has been meaningful to you?
Yes. As any other child that is born in Iran, that's where I was born, it's very easy to be exposed to poetry from very, very early age because Farsi or Persian is a very poetic language. So being exposed to amazing poets like Sa'di, Hafiz, Ferdowsi, a lot of Sufi poets, including Rumi, was very natural. Rumi's poetry is used in music a lot, and you hear it everywhere. And people even speak in poetry when they talk to one another. So the exposure was from early on. And then the next big thing that shaped that for me is that at the age of 14, the most important event of my life happened, which I was introduced to the school of Sufism. And then through those teachings and those texts, I became more aware of the inner meanings of what Rumi was pointing to. And that's where poetry turned into sacred verses for me. And then later on, as a filmmaker, one of the movies that I wrote, directed, shot, and edited and produced is the one that you named, which was a short film and really focusing on the encounter between Rumi and Shams, which hopefully we'll talk about shortly, that how that changed Rumi's life. And then later realizing the privileges that I have living in the States, the privileges of knowing Persian, having been raised in the same culture as Rumi, and then being exposed to Sufism and the inner meanings of what is speaking to and pointing to, I've decided to create this school on Rumi, where then I offer, using the original text, I offer the Westerners the key points behind the metaphors, analogies, symbols, and stories that he uses that are totally lost in translation.
Yeah, that's a great transition. I wanted to ask you about that. One of your contributions has been to point that out. And it reminds me, as someone who has an interest in some of the Eastern traditions, especially their more psychologically relevant ideas and methods, that many of the early translations are well intended, but deeply misleading. And accurate translations really can penetrate to the heart of some really important qualities. You know, Rumi is all around. I can't remember it, but I'm sure he's on the back of some apple juice bottle of some kind somewhere. So, can you give us an example or two, without getting
Sure.
overly scholastic about it, how it's important to get a good translation, like your translations of
Right.
Rumi?
Before answering that very quickly, it's important to say that in the East, Rumi is not really considered a poet, and his work is not considered poetry, kind of like someone sitting and contemplating and writing down poetry. He is considered a saint, and his work is considered sacred verses. And so that's very important to know.
It's interesting right there.
It's also very important to know that words are all fingers pointing to the moon. They have limitations, but that's the instrument that Rumi used through poems, metaphors, symbols, analogies, and all the stories to kind of shed light in something that he actually had experienced. Kind of like talking about, let's say, the horizontal or vertical integration of the brain. Like reading about it is one thing, but embodying it is yet another. So a couple of very important reasons why proper translations are important is that, first of all, we want to know what was actually said without any cultural appropriations or projections, 800 years later, because when we really look at what he has gifted us, there is no reason to alter it because it's really timeless and is still very relevant. The second important thing is that just like any work has its own audience, he wrote from the love that it was inside of him to lovers of truth. So because he wasn't a pop poet writing pop poetry, or he wrote, and what's embedded in his teachings and his poetry are actual instructions and ways of the path. So for those seekers and lovers of truth, this is a map, in a way, that points to it, and it's embedded with secrets.
So it's important to get it accurate.
Absolutely. That's saying that the map is not the territory, but we want to have at least the most accurate map. So for those that do have this fire of longing inside of their hearts towards wholeness, his poetry can serve, as opposed to just some sentimentality, or, as you said, kind of like a hallmark way of the way Rumi is being portrayed these days. So those are the two main reasons. And here's a great example. I could give you dozens and dozens of examples, but one example that I will give is the very popular one of his that is all around social media, is out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There's a field, I will meet you there. Well, this is pretty cute. It's very beautiful. It's a great pickup line as well, and that is how it's being used these days. That's just fine. But here is a little window of the journey it took to become what it is, just so we can see what he actually said. So the original goes as this, and I'm going to skip reading the Persian one for the sake of time. I'm going to go straight into the accurate English version of
Would you be willing to say the Persian version?
Of course, I will. Okay. از کفر و ز اسلام برون صحرایی است ما را به میان آن فضا سودایی است عارف چو بدان رسید سر را بنهد نی کفر و نه اسلام نه آنجا جایی است. He says, beyond Islam and unbelief, there is a desert plain.
A desert what?
Desert plain.
Plain.
Yes. For us, there is a yearning in the midst of that expanse. The knower of God, or Arif, who reaches that plain will prostrate in prayer. For there is neither Islam, nor unbelief, nor anywhere in that place. So here, he's giving us a lot of keys. He's speaking to non-duality. He's speaking that to a mystic, even the concepts of belief and unbelief all are irrelevant. He's bringing relevancy to the secrets of a prostration, which, himself and millions and billions of Muslims do during their daily prayer, what that signifies. And he's also talking about the letting go and the annihilation of the ego and all the false identities into the essence of who we really are. And the translator admitted in a radio interview himself that he deliberately took out the word Islam, or continues to in any of other parts of the poetry, because of his fear or kind of during the Islamophobia, the fundamentalism, what have you. But what he has failed to understand is that Rumi is speaking to the essence and the truth of this religion, not what the news have said or what people have done. So at a time like today, it's almost a sin to take these keys away, because not only they're important keys for a spiritual path, but at our time, it's also a corrective experience or a healing at a time of Islamophobia, to understand that Rumi actually manifested the full potentiality and the essence of Islam, which again, the word salam, which means peace, and Islam, which means to surrender, they come from the same root, which mean health, the wholeness. So all of it, everything, and the biggest practice in Islam and Sufism, which is remembrance, and all of its different forms, are all bringing us to the wholeness and allowing us to discern between the parts that keep us away from this purity, this wholeness, this natural disposition which we have with us at any given time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. That's probably a segue to this question, which is, as you point out, most people, me included, routinely encounter Rumi extracted from any kind of context. Words on a page, some guy who lived a long time ago. That's about it. And could you give us a brief sketch of Rumi's life?
Absolutely, I'll do it as fast as I can. He was born on a Sunday, September 30th, 1207 in Balkh, a city that is currently in northern Afghanistan, which was part of the Persia. And he grew up in a very religious family. His father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather were all Muslim leaders and well-known individuals. So from early on, he was not only exposed to the religion itself, but because his father's journals reveal what a spiritual Sufi and a mystic he was also was raised with the esoteric aspect of Islam. And fast forward to the age of 12, his family, alongside 200 other members, migrated away and went westward because of the imminent threat of Genghis Khan, the Mongols, who were killing and burning everything at sight. So they went through modern-day Iran, they went to Iraq, they went to Mecca in Saudi Arabia for pilgrimage, then they made their way up to Syria, and then they finally ended up in modern-day Turkey, where they were welcomed by the prince of the time and settled in the city Konya, where his father became the leader of a school, of a religious school. Then a few years later, his father passes away, and one of his father's top students from Balkh reunites with the family, but finds out the father has passed away, becomes Rumi's mentor. And one of the things he does with him is he asks him to go to Damascus and spend 3-4 years there. At the time, Damascus was known as the city of saints, where all the amazing saints were there. So he studied there for 3 to 4 years and then came back, followed by a handful of chelles, and those are 40 days and nights in solitude, in contemplation and prayer and remembrance. And then he was given the cloak, he became the head of the school that his father ran. And then fast forward, at the age of 37, he's having over 10,000 students at this time. And you have men, women, lay people, people of government, princes, and everyone coming to his talks. He was a very well-known intellect and a scholar. And on one auspicious fall day, November 29th, 1244, he meets this wandering dervish called Shams of Tabriz. And it's a longer story, but in this meeting, it's like the meeting of two oceans that were longing for one another. That was the beginning of his true alchemy and transformation from the well-respected genius scholar and a very serious, happy, and accomplished individual to this mystical poet, wandering dervish, hand-clapping, whirling, crazy lover that we know him today. And so then a couple of other things is that Shams disappears a couple of times, but the second time he disappears, that breaks Rumi's heart wide open, and that longing, from that longing, he pours out over 70,000 lines of poetry for the rest of his life. And he understands that Shams was just a catalyst for him to find a true beloved, true son inside of his own heart. And what's beautiful is that Shams of Tabriz, Shams also literally means the sun. And it's also very important to know that Rumi wasn't laying in lavender fields and tulip fields writing poetry. No, this was at a time where a couple of hundred years after the Crusades, the Mongols were invading and burning and killing everything all the way they had reached Turkey. And it was the first onset of the Islamic amnesia. The Islamic world was losing its touch with the essence of the Prophet's teachings. And there was war around as well. So it's also important to know that all of this came through him. The sun, he found the sun while the earth was going through an earthly eclipse.
Thank you so much.
Course.
And another piece of this that I've really learned from you is to locate Rumi, inside Islam. And I find myself thinking by analogy, it would be a little bit like extracting, Zen proverbs or extracting teachings of St. Francis of Assisi from their actual proper context. So, in terms of Islam, maybe you could just highlight a handful of themes that Rumi was particularly grappling with, or maybe even struggling with, that could be usefully contextualized inside Islam. Obviously, the point here is not to advocate for or against anything, but to kind of see it in its own merits. So, can you kind of locate Rumi briefly here in his Muslim context?
Absolutely. Like some of the main themes in Islam that he worked with started with love itself. It's the ultimate love, because for the drop to become one with the ocean, to let go, which is the essence of what Islam stands for. That's what the surrender means, the total annihilation into the existence, the rebirth, or the die before you die, requires love. And we can maybe talk about love a little bit later, about what we're talking about here in the context of Sufism and Rumi, what love means. Just the longing, the dying, the love, the manifesting our full potentialities.
The dying as a separate ego.
Exactly.
That's what you mean, yeah.
Exactly. Dying from all that is not us to our birthright, which is always here. Wherever we go, it's with us. And unity, kind of the unity is another big piece in his Islamic teachings, the oneness, seeing oneness in everything. The reason every faith was present the day he had passed away, and people each held their own sacred text, was because he manifested the essence of the religion he grew up with and found the true love and compassion and peace through experience. And that spoke to people's hearts to a point that it resonates 800 years later, which is one of the very important handful of reasons why not only he is relevant today, but why he popped up today and is in our consciousness.
Can you say more about that? So here we have this guy who is remarkable. I'm going to tease you slightly here. He lived 800 years ago, had an amazing life. Okay. Why is he relevant today, especially for most Westerners who are not themselves Muslim?
Right. When we get to the essence of any religion, we get to that desert plain that he's talking about. We go beyond the form. And spirituality and the journey, in a way we can say, is a journey from form to inner meaning. Everything has a form. Meditation has a form, prayer has a form, studying has a form. But when we go through the true experiential aspect, the form is still there and honored, but the inner meaning is what is important. So we shift towards really experiencing and truly knowing something, not just intellectually, but with our entire being, with our heart, and the connection with our heart and our brain and our mind. So in a way, that is the journey. And so that's one thing. Another is, well, he, in a way, where I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'll just say this for now. In a way, he projected and threw a kiss towards this era in some of his poetry. And so that is kind of like the sacred reason why he suddenly, it's not accidental that in this time and era, his work is being translated and we need to hear it. And also at the same time, I feel is like the cosmic, kind of the divine comedy in a way, that in an age of Islamophobia, in an age of tension, in an age of war, in an age of like even in this country, there's so much division. Right underneath our noses, there's a man who truly manifested in experientially and blossomed the teaching of a religion that most people have aversion towards, and the most people that have the aversion towards, little of them have direct experience. It's something they learn or they inherit from outside of themselves. So,
but if I could, like Rumi started becoming popular 20, 30 years ago, really, before 9/11 in America, before the so-called clash of civilizations really got into high gear recently. And
right.
I want to push this a bit. Uh, what, why do you think that Rumi speaks to so many people who don't relate to him in any kind of religious context? It's like a voice calling to us from 800 years ago that is really important for people. How do you think that happened? Why do you think that's happened?
Well, like I said, there is a divine reason for it. And outside of that, I think he speaks to the heart. He speaks of love.
That's
He speaks
interesting.
of something that we all feel and long
Yeah.
for.
Which is an uncommon focus these days.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's like the model. He's like, hey, this is how going through this fire of longing and the fire of love looks like. And people are resonating with that. And so because his teachings and what he discovered is timeless, and it's beyond geographical, cultural, and religious boundaries. Therefore, people resonate with it.
Yeah. I'd say for me, one of the things that's so striking about Rumi is the way in which he says, essentially, pay attention to the profound, whatever that is for you, it's really important. And I think
Yes.
about there's so much about modern life with its busyness and its quick and generally superficial pleasures that tends to crowd out and swerve away from what's profound. And even people who do speak about what's profound get mocked as somehow not cool,
Right.
or they're getting too serious about something. Nothing matters when everything is consumable, move on. And Rumi is clearly a strong corrective to that. He really stands outside that, and he stands against that. And I think he speaks to, in my own view, um, that yearning in everybody's heart, really, for what is profound. And essentially he's saying, don't forget profundity and find what is profound to you and take your seat there,
Yes.
rest there. That's what's really important. So.
Yes. One of his more popularly known lectures is when he says exactly that, that there is this one thing you've come here for. That if you do every other thing but this thing, you lose life. But if you do this thing and forget anything else, you've won it. That one needful thing that is, kind of, it's that longing, that pull inside of you that no matter how much you gain in this life is still there. He brings your attention to that again and again and again because he grew up in a set of teachings, and he also gifted us that were extremely embodied. Like the concept of spiritual bypassing could not even exist in such settings because it includes the psyche. There's Sufi psychology. It includes the body. The body in Islam and in Sufism is never looked down upon. It's something very holy. Is a vehicle. It's a sacred house. To the emotions, where the guest house is a popular poem where he invites and normalizes the thoughts and emotions that constantly arise in us. He invites us to look and be a good host because they have a message from beyond for us, and all the way to spirituality. So it's a very holistic and an embodied path that he grew up with and that he leaves us, gives us with.
Okay, that's great. Well, we've already begun talking about, I'd like to get into several specific topics, and we've already begun speaking of a couple of them at least. Why don't we start with love? Clearly, Rumi was deeply engaged with love, as you say, in an underlying context in which Islam is deeply engaged with love, as it's in its essence, let's say. And so, I wonder if you could talk more about this aspect of Rumi.
Yes.
How can Rumi open us to a depth of love,
Mhm.
and perhaps open us to certain aspects of love that may be underemphasized or deprioritized in conventional approaches to love?
Right. Very beautiful, beautiful question. It's important to preface this by saying that in Persian, the language that he wrote in, and the language that I grew up with, we don't have pronouns for he, she, or it. We just have the pronoun u, that in the context of speaking and in writing, you realize which gender you're speaking of. So therefore, the language itself is very faithful in not creating an anthropomorphic God outside. So the language is very sacred itself. That being said, the word for love in Persian, or that it came from Arabic, is ishq. And ishq comes from another word, ashaq, which was this it's this ivy plant that sprouts out of the ground and intertwines itself around the object of its love, and kind of in a way it intertwines, showing the longing, and then it wraps itself, which signifies love, and it merges itself with that plant, which signifies oneness, unity, and the ultimate goal of love. So even in the language, we have love expressing all the different rays, but in other languages, including Persian, you not only have these very profound roots for what love means, but you also have multiple words expressing different kinds of love. So, free from an anthropomorphic way of looking at love and seeing it, love, ish, points to that invisible glue, that essence that makes everything possible in this life.
Hmm.
Kind of what made the sperm go towards an egg and go around it and bang itself against it until it goes in. That's love. It's the sunflower that kind of what makes the sunflower follow the sun 24 hours a day, or our planets rotate around the sun. All of this is love, or how you and I, Rick, have come together is what love has pulled us. So love in Sufism and love in Rumi's poetry is inviting us to really become more fine-tuned and get in touch with the more subtle aspects of love. This energy, this invisible energy that we feel, but it's what gives rise to life and everything and all the movements within it. That is love. Before one of its reflections, which is love between humans, is just a reflection of that. So looking at it from that perspective and starting the roots of love from that perspective, then love becomes a guide, this magnetic pull towards that wholeness that we all long for.
Mm.
We can look at everything. There's a verse in the Quran that all the Sufis, including Rumi, repeat. They say that whichever way I turn, I see the face of the beloved. So experientially, through the dyings, through the purifications, and through letting love guide us, as opposed to our patterns and conditionings and things that were mindlessly inherited without questioning from family, culture, society, if we allow love to guide us, then we can not only see this life differently, like vipassana, seeing things as they are, but also heed that call that is in our heart and have a homecoming while we live amongst people in the world, cultivate that rich inner world without which this world outside would not exist.
One thing that really touches me in what you just said there, Pouria, is that love conceived in this way as that which is a pulling together, a drawing together,
Mhm.
is obviously central to wholeness, which is the central interest and concern. It's where you started here. It's, as you've said, is sort of at the root of words like salam and Islam, the sense of
Mhm.
wholeness. And
Yeah.
clearly, love being absolutely, intimately at the heart of all that. So, how does someone tap into the power of love, which you're conceiving of as something that shades into uh, that has a life of its own somehow, independent of people's kind of conventional lovingness, and they're tapping into that deep, deep, deep wellspring there of love in the sense that you're meaning it here. How can people tap into that deep wellspring without getting into conflict with others because they've fallen so much in love with us that they tip into war with them?
Are you speaking to the external aspect of this, like the global aspect of this?
This obviously has a resonance here thematically. I'm kind of going to steer away from politics, but I just mean it the ways in which people, for example, can become jealous. They can become so besotted with one person, even due to what Jung called inflation, in which they are really tapping into something profound, like you're talking about a profound wellspring of love. But that you can feel so right, it can feel so true. We're so meant to be together, which then starts sliding into stalking,
Right,
possessiveness,
right, right.
jealous behavior, and so forth. And also you can just see it in families, the kind of love that a parent, perhaps a mother, might have for her child, and then that can form a kind of unit that becomes overly separated from other people in the family system, such as a partner or others. So I'm interested in how can we tap into the power here and what's true and useful and what's profound and great while keeping your eyes open and not getting drawn down some slippery slope into trouble.
I guess what this begs the question is to be curious and discern to see that if that is even love, if that is the love we're talking about here, because semantics have power, but it's always good. Rumi invites us to art of discernment, which is one of the weeks in the programs that I teach. Is a big teachings of Sufism and Rumi, where we need to learn the art of discernment. So the love that starting with Rumi, the love that Rumi speaks of is the love of the heart, is a love of the presence, is a love which is invisible but can be really felt. So it depends who is hearing and who is going on a spiritual path. If the presence and the heart is going on a spiritual path, is one thing. If the mind, the ego, the identity, and the personality is going on a spiritual path, it's another. And there will be two different results of love. It's the egoic aspect that turns love into attachments and then creates from its own, everything begets itself. So jealousy or attachment, unhealthy attachments, and everything else that you've named, by their nature, come from a root of their own nature. So then we cannot say that this came from pure love. It was created from the sameness. Kind of like Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it, kind of a thing. From a place of the heart, which includes discernment, which includes learning to differentiate between the psychological and the emotional and the egoic and the spiritual, that doesn't turn into jealousy or attachment or stalking or a threat. That is an ongoing pool. It's not going to be a peachy path. Actually, it's going to be a very fiery path. But every step towards it brings you closer to the wholeness. Whereas this one, it's a journey of destruction or more begetting of itself.
Yeah, that's great. I don't know what you would think about this. I want to run it by you, but for someone who's interested in engaging what you're talking about, let's say, and using it in everyday life, let's suppose as a parent with a child, or someone with your partner or mate, or with your dog, or with a friend, let's say, there you are. I'm just imagining this, so check me here.
Yeah.
There you are, there I am, feeling loving in a fairly ordinary, wholesome, nice, and ordinary kind of conventional way, feeling loving. And then in the midst of that lovingness, inquiring or exploring or maybe opening to what starts to feel authentically deeper, more universal, more transpersonal, perhaps.
Absolutely.
And then see what happens in that exploration, including what changes, perhaps, even in just subtle ways, in the conventional moment of talking with your child, or walking your dog, or hanging out with your spouse.
Beautiful. I mean, that is exactly what's being said here. That's very beautiful. Rumi would say, what are you doing with your capital? And in the context, what he's meaning by capital is that every moment that you've been gifted, every breath that you have, this life that you've been gifted. So from that perspective, one of the ways to appreciate every breath that we've been given, every moment that we get to be alive, is to go take the opportunity to go deeper into that. And that is what you just so beautifully said, that in every encounter, every moment, we can expand and kind of get in touch with something that is bigger, to shift from that contraction into the expansion, and to delve into a love that is even bigger and bigger and bigger, and allowing that to not just be a blissful state that we want to feel and experience. No, no, no. For it to be our informed center, for it to then inform our way of being in this life, to inform every action that we take, to inform every word that comes out of our mouth. Because without that, then it just becomes, that too can become an addiction or something to achieve or a craving. But love is here, the heart is here to also guide and inform us, just like the seed informs every bit of this humongous tree, how to grow, where to have branches, and how much to grow. Comes from that seed that if you put it under the biggest microscopes in this world, you will not see, because what makes the tree is invisible to the eyes, and will always be invisible to these eyes. That's why Rumi invites us to cultivate insight, the inner vision. And that is, like you say, to pause, to go deeper, to discern, and be okay with silence, be okay with pauses, being okay with the not knowing mind. But at the same time, being active, like, I don't know, but from the heart, being curious. Not that I know and just letting it go.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm open. My antennas are up. Hopefully I will reach this frequency, because what I'm looking for, what I want, exists. Am I tuned into it? So a Sufi path also cultivates all of your channels inside of your body, and all of your antennas and all of your receptivity, for you to truly and experientially be receptive to this existence.
Mm-hmm.
So it's beyond intellect, it's beyond theory, it's beyond just learning something that comes one day and goes the other.
Yeah. When people have the experience of, let's say, in my example, starting with something that seems quite ordinary and also beautiful and wonderful, love of a child, love of a partner, love of a friend, and then opens to something that feels experientially meaningfully distinct as something larger, deeper, beyond the local self, transpersonal. Even there in this can be an experience that what we're tapping into in some meaningful way partakes of something transcendental. The key point here, that experiential process can have its own validity and usefulness without necessarily taking a stance ontologically as to the reality or the ontological status, the status of existence, of what it feels like we're experientially tuning into. And I think sometimes people can get caught up in a lot of philosophizing or a lot of dogmatism about the ontological status as existent or not existent of what experientially is enormously rich and meaningful and wonderful. And so I would just kind of like to call out the difference between something that's experientially valid and its ontological status, its status in terms of existence, and the fact that people can really get value experientially from this feeling of opening and deepening and tapping into something that feels transpersonal without getting caught up in dogmatism about whether it actually is transpersonal or even transcendental.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And those are opportunities then for the individual to discern between saying like, what is it that wants to create a dogma? And then when you inquire into that, you see that it's not the heart, it's the personhood that wants to do that. So in a way, we are gifted kind of these confusions or these contraction and expansions as a gift to discern more and more and more and make it more pure and pure and pure and embody it more and more and more. Like what I'll say is that something in my own personal life I will share with you. The older that I get and the more I get into these teachings and marinate in them, the more I'm shifting from what I call personal love to impersonal. You know, sometimes people call it unconditional love and what have you. I like the word impersonal love because then I can really love you and be there for you. I don't have to like or agree
Yeah.
with certain aspects. And that is so okay.
Yeah.
The fascination for me to be okay with all of you comes from a fear inside of me or an obligation or some sort of an introjection to prove to myself and to the other I am what I'm really not yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if I come from an impersonal love, not only I can love all of that and have true compassion in practice, but it also allows room for me to get in touch with more of my potentiality. And also, we will see that a lot of the effects of such things like love, most of it is unseen.
Unseen. Yeah.
Unseen. You know, like I have so much love for you, Rick, and you know this, and I know this, and I've had this love for you for years. And I don't know, I mean, like I could sit here until the cows come home, try to put words and write poetry and to explain it, but none of it will be what I have for you. And so it's also, this also builds kind of like a true faith into the world of unseen. So we then are not so much caught into wanting to believe in things that only the five limited senses can sense, but also we're not so obligated to be impacted and influenced by those who only want to see that version of it. So we don't abandon our truth and what we feel and what we know for the sake of something that is outside us.
That's great. Well, let me ask you if I could also about a second of three major themes here. The first one being love, second being longing. It's something you've spoken of a lot, and you really talked about these critical moments in Rumi's own life, in one of which being when he was separated, I think you said for the second time, from Shams. His incredible longing for Shams broke his heart open into this loving devotion to everything, including through everything, the divine. And so I wondered if you could talk about longing, especially for people who are attentive to the ways in which longing can tip into craving. How do we stay on the good side of that pitch of the roof of the house of desire that is longing in this healthy sense, you mean, rather than tipping into some kind of craving or even idolatry, idolization of that which we love?
Oh, longing. Oh, yeah. we call it the fire of longing in the Rumi courses. You know, it's the second week of level 1 is the fire of longing. It comes right after love.
Yeah, that you teach, yeah.
Yeah, a metaphor that I use is that when you're grilling vegetables, you know, there's this beautiful fragrance that permeates space. You go, oh, you know, vegetables, you're cooking vegetables? So if love had a fragrance, it's longing. If love had a fragrance, it's longing. And this longing is something that every human being, regardless of all the cultural, religious, national, geographical differences, are born with. In a way, Sufism.
The longing, it sounds like something's missing. I mean, the word want, the root of the word want is lack. And so why is longing good if implicit in it is a sense of not already having that which one longs for?
Oh, I will get to that. That's a, you know, that's a.
All right, I'll zip it until you get there.
No, I love it. I love it. I always love the way you think. So when we look at longing, which you know, Rumi talks about it in the opening of his Masnavi, which I'll show you in a way because I want to give everyone a visual kind of a visual tool to see how much he has written, is that this longing that we have is actually what's in Sufi psychology, it's the root of every drive in this life. Like even the pursuit of happiness outside, wanting to become a millionaire, buying all the material, going after, you know, lust, going after relationship after relationship, whatever you want to call it, still is that longing that has not been put in its right context. And when we look at longing, we see in Rumi's teachings, we see two sets of opposite. We have union and separation, which then again, in other Sufi teachings is expansion and contraction, which is part of life. Like you can see that in our breath, there is expansion and contraction. You see it in our emotions. You see it in life. You see it in earth. You see the sun even breathes. The sun breathes. All the planets breathe. So this expansion and contraction is part of existence, right? So then union is like that blissful being one with the object of your longing, and separation is this, oh, longing for it, you're not there. But here is the question, here's the qualm, here's the contemplation. Without having tasted union, how can anyone know or feel they're separate to begin with? How can even the concept of feeling separate, you know, so many people feel I'm a stranger in this world. I feel like a stranger, or like I have all this money. My relationship is going really well, yet it's not enough. Yet I'm not, you know, there's something still nagging inside. Sufism and Rumi's teachings normalizes that, says that which you're looking for, A, it cannot be attained in anything outside of you. And B, it is your birthright and it is the compass that you were born with that is drawing you back to your essence, to who you really are, because you're supposed to live this life awakened. This life is not like in 70, 80, 90 years of working really hard. No, enlightenment is the beginning of it. It's not, should not be turned into a path or a model or a journey. No, wake up as soon as possible.
So the longing, I mean, I think of this for people that deep down, often they have a kind of longing.
Yes.
That is disowned or suppressed. And at the deepest level, I think, as I say to people, let your longings be your teacher.
Yes.
Listen to the longings in your heart. They're telling you something really important. And I think you're speaking to the most important longings of all, which are union. Like I think of the word yoga is union, you know, union ultimately with the ground, true nature, the universe altogether. If we were to stay in a completely secular frame, there is that longing in us. Sometimes, you know, Freud thought about it as longing to return to the womb. And I think there are depths to that longing, which go way beyond, what Sigmund was thinking. But anyway, that's kind of what you're talking about. And you're saying it's actually really important to listen to that really, really, some people say the still, quiet voice of that longing.
Yes, because in Sufi psychology, just imagine how every issue or every other longing that you have, or every confusion, whatever you want to call it, how they would fall into place if you were introduced to, and initially, then guided, and then we're in touch with the source and the ultimate longing that you have. How then everything would fall in its right perspective, as opposed to, spending decades, chasing different issues and different, curiosities and confusions and even pathology or whatever you want to call it. Imagine if there was a clarity that would bring everything in a right context, and how that would shape, let's say, psychotherapy or healing or whatever it is, or even a spiritual path, how that would shape it if I knew somehow inside of myself that ultimately that union is going to bring the happiness that I seek. Short of that is about kind of learning how to manage life while keeping one eye outside, living as fully as I can, and another eye inside, working on bringing that longing towards union, and not shortchange myself. Because if I'm not in touch with that, then I will continue to chase after things again and again and again and again and again. I achieve one thing that I crave for.
Right. You can never get enough of what you don't really want.
Exactly.
So I'm hearing you talk about longing. I'm hearing longing in some ways as like a river that we can give ourselves over to, as a wholesome, even sacred purpose that can carry us along. But where I might diverge from you a little bit and want to challenge this a bit is, to me, longing is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself.
Absolutely.
And the point of the longing is to use it as, in effect, a compass that identifies what your North Star is, and to use the longing as a motivator through giving yourself over to the river of it, as it were, and letting it really carry you along, and prioritize what's really important, truly, in your life. Like when you really look back from I call it the view on the porch, in your 80s or 90s or beyond, in your rocker, and you look back over your life, what are the longings you will wish that you had given yourself over to? I mean, those are really useful ways to put it. And still, the ultimate point is to be that which one longs for, to have that which one longs for, to be rested in that which one longs for. Correct? Not simply to take longing as an end in itself.
No, everything is a means to an end.
Not everything, but maybe longing might be.
Right. But everything in life in this context, every up and down, every longing, every fortune or misfortune, whatever, good, up, down, bad, everything we want to name, in a way, there are guiding us towards wholeness. If we really be guided towards that and see it in that context. And you're so right. That's why I said longing is the fragrance of love, because you smell it and then you follow it. You want to know what the source is. So the longing cannot be but a means to an end. If it becomes a form of itself, then we've lost it. And that is why it's important for me to say, who is doing the longing? Who is the seeker? Who is the person pursuing wholeness? And so that's very important, because if it's the presence, if it's our being using our mind and our brain and every beautiful thing we've been gifted, that's one thing. But if it's the person which is filled with craving and aversion and attachments and the ego that wants to achieve things and wants to have a status, that if that is going, that will do it. That would be a different journey of longing. So
yeah, you can imagine the addict longing for a fix.
Yes,
Not
right.
the kind of longing we're talking about.
Absolutely. So the last thing I'll say around this is like it's like a GPS, right? The most important thing that a GPS needs to know, like if I want to come visit you, you give me your address and I put it into the GPS before it can tell me how to get to you. The most important thing that it needs to know is for it to be in touch with the satellite and recognize where it is to begin with before it can
where you are right now.
A lot of this stuff we can say it's very important to pause and see where we are, who is the seeker, and do some discernment before we go too far into the journey.
Well, this is great. We're going to be finishing up soon, but I definitely want to slip this topic in. Just no big deal. The loss of ego, as Rumi put it, dying before you die. And I wondered if you could speak about that, including how we can keep walking and talking and paying the rent after we've died before we die.
Well, if Rumi was like if this universe was filled with the shore with sands, and Rumi was that, or the Sufis were that, I'm not even a single grain of that. But life experiences have created a faith that I believe these individuals, because I can see, I can feel, I can experience what they're talking about. So Rumi, what he's done, because he had such a love affair with the Prophet, that he took the Prophet's saying, that his teaching, die or you die. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, die before you die. And over 6,000 lines of Rumi's poetry are direct lines from the Quran. So in a way, this book, the Masnavi, is called the Quran in Persian, which is one of his works that he wrote in the latter part of his life. So die before you die is an invitation that through remembrance, through practice, through kind of living in life, but working on that movement towards wholeness, which is our natural disposition, what happens is that we shed all these veils of forgetfulness, that we learn, that we inherited, that none of it is ours. One of the biggest challenges that Shams gave Rumi, he said, what do you know? And every time Rumi answered with his father's teachings or a Quranic verse or some smart answer, he said, what do you know? Like, what do you really know? If you were on your deathbed and someone asked, what do you know?
That is a great question.
So what that does is that's why this path, the Sufi path, this path that Rumi is inviting us on, it is a path of burning. It's not a path of just blissful and all. No, to the extent that Pouria has forgotten and his ego has craved and attached, to that degree, he has to learn to die and let go. But what
you, in other words, yeah.
What the paradox is, the more you die, the more you actually then live. I mean, look at what Rumi has done. Look at all the amazing scientists, mystics, women and men, saints, prophets, philosophers, the stuff that they gifted us. That's a lot, and they gifted us those things way before there was Google, there was internet, there was this globalization, even telephones or TVs. So it's important to ask, how did they discover all of that? I can too, because we're of the same. We have the same body, we have the same brain, we have the same full potentialities. So die before you die is the means to an end. So we die and die and die before the inevitable death of the body.
To me, it seems like you're talking about shedding sort of superficial husks of persona.
Yeah.
And also you're talking about shedding who is it who longs, right? Who is it who loves? And you're talking about shedding these subpersonalities or more superficial and especially egoic, self-centered aspects of the person altogether, so that there's a greater opportunity, so that inner divisions fall away, inner fragmentation falls away as we shed these husks. and there's more sense of wholeness and integration. And also we um, increasingly are established in our own essence rather than being momentarily established in one kind of peripheral subpersonality or act or another.
Beautiful. Yes. Of course, we have to be careful because the ego doesn't like hearing all of that, because the ego projects falsely that if it's gone or if it's sandpapered, then it doesn't know what to do. Well, these human beings before us came and lived and had families and worked and produced amazing beauty through their art and poetry and writings and music and what have you. And they still functioned really well. But the way they functioned, they had access to the essence of this beautiful life, not just its form. So then we have to keep ego at check because it falsely has convinced us, because it's the ego thinking itself. And of course, it doesn't want to go bye-bye, thinking that if it goes bye-bye or becomes softer, then we lose control over this life. And the mystics and the true scientists tell us, no, it's exactly the other way around. You get in touch with the full vividness of this rich life you've been gifted.
That's great. Obviously, there are extremists and have been throughout history of many different kinds who will grab hold of or claim identity with some path or tradition or religion or school of thought and so forth, and then distort it and lose touch with its meanings and so on. And I think we've definitely seen issues like that. In my personal opinion is that the real issue is fundamentalism and dogmatism across traditions. There's no issue with any tradition. The issue is with fundamentalism and dogmatism, and we've seen that in all traditions, including, frankly, scientism, a secular tradition that has its own fundamentalism and dogmatism that you can see. All that said, cut to the heart of the matter. One of the main pseudo-conflicts is between, I think, Christianity and Islam. What could Rumi offer to us today that is about the intersection, really, of the essential truths that have been pointed to in the Islamic tradition and also in the Christian tradition, but the truths that these two different traditions point to are universal truths. They're common truths. They might be described differently, different traditions, understandably, but they're common truths that people who are interested in either tradition can find common ground in. So, what can Rumi tell us about that common ground at the intersection of the fundamental truths that are being pointed to through both Christianity and Islam?
Right. First of all, Rumi would not advocate for a passive or a lazy spiritual path or a life path. He would not. He would teach us to do our work, to do our homework, to cultivate everything that we have accumulated, to turn it into experience. Because in that experiential state, these things that we just talked about do not exist. So the first invitation would be to work on oneself and also to reach out, to do research, to meet people of other faiths, to sit with them, to eat with them. So then we can check, our projections with what's more true. So that being said, the essence of every religion is one thing. There's only one existence. There's only one existence from which everything has manifested. And the religions have initially come to point to that oneness, but they pointed it in different geographical locations using different languages. There's a saying that says that a true Muslim is one who's a true Jew and a true Christian first, because it's an interconnectedness. Like even if we look at revolution, a true kind of evolution or development, let's say, a true development is transcendence and including. You include and you transcend and you include. So Islam teaches everything that has come before it, and its own unique messages of that. And Jesus is a huge figure in Islam. A chapter in the Quran is named Mary, after Mary. And so when we even look at the reality, like even on the surface, it's kind of mind-boggling why such differences exist. But when we, like, let's say we practice mindfulness and we sit on a cushion and we are with our breath, we are with our mind, all it takes is to see the mind, to just have compassion of the potentiality of the mind towards the division, towards fundamentalism, towards attachment, towards egocentristic to anthropocentristic, and fighting against world-centristic ways. So again, when someone experientially practices and is aware, can really understand why pure teachings have turned into what they are. So not partaking in that and not projecting further and letting this narrative continue. Instead, they can break the cycle by true experiencing and then bringing into the world and making connection with the others. Because it is a joke. It is sad that religions are up, but it's not, as you said, it's not the religions, it's the people who have projected their own neurosis, their own conditionings onto a teaching, and either they're in their egocentric kind of a development area or in their ethnocentristic, and that gives them a sense of belonging because they haven't had a chance to tap into what Rumi is pointing us to, something bigger, to know that a true belonging, we already belong. We're right here. We're alive. Our heart is beating.
Yeah.
The soles of our feet are touching the ground.
Yeah.
And, so when we don't have access to that, then we need to identify with groups, with clubs. And it's the nature of groups and clubs and ethnocentristic way of living to have an enemy.
Us against them.
Yeah.
Well, that's very, very beautiful, very haunting to reflect on. And we better wrap up. And I want to ask you one last question that I ask people, just about everybody. So I know you as one of the most dedicated people I've known to personal practice and personal growth, including through the path of remembrance, what is always already true that we partake of. What are you working on these days? What's kind of one key thing that's your growing edge, if you're willing to be a little confessed here, a little revealed,
Of course.
that you're really
with you anytime.
that you're developing?
I guess a couple of things. One I've already mentioned is to really kind of discerning between personal love and impersonal love, and really cultivating and expanding the impersonal love within me. To however many breaths or moments or days I have left, is to really spend it manifesting and being drowned in this impersonal love with everyone around me in life. So that's one edge that I'm working on. And the other is contentment. To learn experientially, to be equanimous with whatever life has given me, and to go beyond the dualistic, the good and right, and take it all as fuel to take me back home, to take me to where that longing is taking me, and to go beyond craving and aversion and throwing temper tantrums, to really getting to a place to seeing it all as a divine gift for me to know who I really am and die before I die.
What a beautiful place to end. Pouria, Montazeri, you really do walk the talk, as I said. Just being around you is a transmission. And I encourage other people to check out your website, footprintsofrumi.com, where there's just wonderful, wonderful resources there, including some really good translations of Rumi. So Pouria, thank you again. Thank you for being with us, gracing us with your practice and your presence. And my very sincere hope is that your gifts here and your contributions here will be of deep, meaningful benefit to many, many, many beings. So thank you again.
May it be so. Thank you so much, Rick, for this opportunity. And I love you so much. And I really appreciate this sacred virtual space you created for us to talk about that which cannot be forgotten.